Here's a creationist video I found, which has the ironic title, How Science Works.
Have you ever heard this? Billions of years ago, there was an explosion in space. Or 100,000 years ago, this happened, or that happened. Or even, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Question, how does anyone know? I mean, was anybody there to observe it? Well, actually somebody was, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Check this out. First of all, we need to recognize that there is a huge difference between observational science and historical science.
Okay, let me make something perfectly clear about this. The idea that science is divided into these historical and observational categories is a lie. All empirical sciences are observational by definition. Scientists do not use the terms historical and observational, nor do they conceptually separate sciences into these categories. When creationists say that theories about events in the past do not meet the same standard of repeatability and reproducibility as theories about events in the present, this is false. It has been pointed out to them over and over again that not only can you test the Big Bang Theory and the theory of evolution, they both have been tested and corroborated. You don't have to repeat the Big Bang in order to test the Big Bang Theory, and you don't have to repeat evolution in order to test the theory of evolution. No matter how many times this is pointed out to them, creationists continue to repeat this historical, observational bullshit.
Both are valuable, but very different. Let's define the two real quick, shall we? Observational science is simply when we observe something and experiment to draw conclusions. It involves repeatable experimentation and observations in the present.
Yes, like when we look in the present at whether humans have a chromosome made from two fused chromosomes, the absence of which would prove we didn't descend from other apes. Or when we look in the present for the cosmic microwave background radiation, the absence of which would be strong evidence against the Big Bang.
It's through observational science that we find cures for diseases and build space shuttles, stuff like that. Now, through historical science, we consider things that happened in the past, but they cannot be checked in the same way. I mean, we don't have access to the past like we do the present because, well, it's gone, right?
Wrong. We don't have to repeat the past. Events in the past leave evidence in the present, and we can test our hypotheses about what happened in the past by comparing those hypotheses to that evidence, just as we can test our hypotheses about what happens in the present by comparing those hypotheses to the evidence. In both cases, we can make predictions about the future. The theory of evolution can be used to make predictions about the features of future fossil discoveries. Can creationism do this? No. Can the Bible do this? No.
All we really have is speculation, or at best, circumstantial evidences of past events based on what we see in the present. That's not to say that we can't make intelligent guesses about the past, or form reasonable inferences from rocks or fossils in the present, but we certainly cannot directly test our conclusions because we cannot repeat the past.
We don't need to repeat the past to directly test our findings. I think they misunderstand the standard of repeatability. When scientists say that an experiment must be repeatable, they only mean that other people should be able to do the experiment themselves and get the same results. It does not mean that the event that a hypothesis describes has to be repeatable. An experiment that tests evolution can meet the standard of repeatability without needing to repeat the process of evolution itself.
Let's drop an example down here for a minute and take a look at the Eiffel Tower. You know, that 19th century Parisian monument designed by Gustave Eiffel that stands 1,063 feet tall, which was built as the entrance for the 1889 World's Fair and is still the tallest building in Paris today, visited by millions of people each year? Yeah, that one. Well, guess what? Everything I just told you is true, but how do we test it? Well, applying observational science, we can, of course, observe the Eiffel Tower anytime we're in Paris. It's here in the present. Then, we can continue by testing the height and comparing it to all the other structures in Paris and confirm the claim that it is indeed the tallest building in Paris. But that's the extent of the kind of facts that can be proved by observational science in reference to this claim. How do we really know that Gustave designed it? How do we really know it was built in the 19th century as an entrance to the 1889 World's Fair? How do we really know how many people visited? That's all in the past. It can't be repeated. For that kind of information, we need to go outside the limits of observational science and discover what has been communicated to us through historical documents and eyewitness accounts. And furthermore, we have to believe those eyewitnesses and documents are trustworthy.
Well, some of the claims that you're making simply aren't scientific. You wouldn't use historical science to investigate who designed the Eiffel Tower, or any other kind of science, because that's not a scientific question. Nonetheless, there are still factual claims about the history of the Eiffel Tower that we can demonstrate through observing things in the present without relying on historical documents. For example, the Eiffel Tower is made made out of iron, so we know it could not have been built before iron smelting was invented. We don't need to rely on historical documents to infer this. In fact, even if every historical document said otherwise, the physical evidence we observe in the present would trump those documents, no matter how reliable they were considered to be. Actually, one method we can use to judge the reliability of historical documents is physical dating. If a painting is inscribed with a date from the 9th century, but a scientific analysis of its materials indicates that it was painted in the 19th, then what should we believe, the inscription or the science? I'll put my money on the science. In fact, this is a method very commonly used to investigate whether paintings are or are not forgeries. Similarly, the Bible says that God created the earth 6,000 years ago, but physical dating methods say otherwise. I think it's wisest to put my money on the physical dating methods. Creationists like to ask, "Were you there?" whenever scientists make claims about the past, as if eyewitness testimony or documentary evidence should be given more credence than physical evidence. If there really is a difference between historical and observational science, then forensics would have to fall under the category of historical science, because it tries to figure out what happened in the past. If a prosecutor found DNA evidence that placed the suspect at the crime scene, creationists seem to think that the defense lawyer could defeat this evidence by asking the prosecutor, "Were you there?" This, of course, is not the case.
The same is true when we talk about the origin of the Earth. The Earth is here. We all agree with that. So, does observational science confirm that the world was created by God? And are there trustworthy documents and eyewitness accounts that confirm it?
No.
Well, let's take the last part first. In short, what we're really asking is my original question: was anybody there to observe it? The answer is yes. God was there, and He told us how He created. He inspired people to write down His very words that became books that were compiled into a complete book called the Bible, which has been verified over and over again and has demonstrated itself to be totally trustworthy in all it claims and teaches.
Wrong.
Even secular scholars will concede that the Bible accurately records historical events.
No, they won't. This is especially the case with the Old Testament. Secular scholars will tell you that there is no evidence for a global flood, the exodus from Egypt, or even the existence of Noah or Moses. And in fact, there is even evidence contrary to these things.
Anyway, we have the most trustworthy revelation from the most trustworthy eyewitness. Now, what about observational science? Does it confirm the Bible? Yes. And what's extremely important to realize is the observable fact that the universe is logical and orderly. That makes sense only if its creator is logical and has imposed order on his creation.
This assumes that without God, everything would be random and chaotic. Why? Why would this be the case? The idea that non-randomness is proof or even evidence of intelligence is a complete non sequitur.
It doesn't make sense at all if the universe is just an accident of a huge explosion. Also, our minds are able to comprehend many things about the universe, and that's only possible if the creator of the mind gave us the ability and desire to explore the universe.
Or if evolution created minds that can understand how things in the universe work because such understanding is at least sometimes advantageous to survival. This seems far more likely to be the case given that people can occasionally be wrong. You would think that a perfect creator would give people perfect truth-finding brains. The fact that brains can occasionally produce false beliefs seems to me to be more consistent with the idea that they developed according to an unguided process that rewards beliefs that aid survival rather than rewarding beliefs which are true.
It doesn't make sense if our brains are byproducts of chance because we couldn't trust their conclusions to ever be accurate.
This is why science is a very skeptical undertaking. Empirical science doesn't try to know anything with perfect certainty. All theories in the empirical sciences are provisional and subject to revision the moment they no longer match experience. Science does not assume that there is some eternal truth out there waiting to be discovered, and it certainly doesn't assume that such a truth has been attained. Scientists will readily acknowledge that any theory in the empirical sciences could end up being falsified at some point in the future.
And lastly, it only makes sense that we can observe and repeat an experiment if the universe consistently obeys the same laws from day to day, which only makes sense if a lawgiver created it that way and upholds it. So to be bluntly honest, science itself, whether observational or historical, is only possible because God exists and the Bible is true.
Why does the Bible need to be true? Even if it were the case that God needs to exist for science to work, why does the Bible need to be true for science to work? And again, there is no reason to assume that things would behave chaotically without some conscious mind maintaining order. The idea that without God there would be chaos is entirely baseless. Why can't regularity and stability occur on their own? Why do creationists think things always need to be held together by magic?